The sky, a vast and seemingly serene expanse, holds a power that we, in our modern age, often take for granted. We ascend into its domain, encased in our metal shells, trusting in technology to shield us from its true nature. But sometimes nature reminds us of its untamable force. Imagine cruising at 36,000 feet, a routine journey high above the world, when the cabin lights flicker and the familiar blue outside turns a menacing, churning black. Lightning cracks across the sky in brilliant, terrifying veins, as wind, like an invisible giant, slams the fuselage with staggering force. This is the moment when the illusion of control shatters. Inside, passengers grip their armrests, their knuckles white. The murmur of conversation is replaced by a tense silence, broken only by hushed prayers and stifled cries. In the cockpit, the pilots are flying blind. The world outside, a maelstrom of violent air and water. Their instruments, their only eyes, scream contradictory warnings. Engines groan under the immense strain, alarms blare a symphony of crisis, and a massive multi-ton machine becomes a fragile leaf in a tempest. They are fighting to land while nature does everything in its power to stop them. Real flights, real storms, seconds from catastrophe. These are not fictional tales. They are the world's scariest real-life plane landings during extreme weather, moments when the delicate balance of flight was nearly lost. Some of these encounters ended in miraculous survival, testaments to the extraordinary skill and courage of the pilots. Others, tragically, ended in disaster, becoming solemn lessons etched into the annals of aviation. But all of them pushed pilots, passengers, and the very machines they flew to the absolute edge of endurance, where the margin between life and death was measured in mere seconds. Here, at Frankfurt Airport, one of Europe's busiest hubs, the stage is set for a dramatic confrontation. On the 1st of March, 2008, a Lufthansa Airbus, A320, designated Flight 44, begins its final approach. Below, the world appears normal, but in the air, a tempest is brewing. Ferocious crosswinds, gusting with unpredictable fury, sweep across the runway. For the pilots, this is not merely an inconvenience. It is a direct challenge to the fundamental principles of a stable landing. The aircraft must fly at an angle to the runway, a technique known as crabbing, to counteract the relentless push of the wind. The A320 descends, seemingly fighting for every foot of altitude. From the ground, it looks unnatural, a great bird flying sideways. Inside, the passengers are thrown against their seats, the strain of the maneuver palpable. The pilots, their focus absolute, manipulate the controls with precision, compensating for each violent gust. But as the wheels near the tarmac, the wind unleashes a particularly savage blow. The aircraft lurches violently, its delicate balance broken in a critical moment. The pilot's corrections are instantaneous, but the forces at play are immense, almost overwhelming the aircraft's control surfaces. In a heart-stopping instant, the left wingtip dips and strikes the runway surface. A shower of sparks erupts as metal grinds against asphalt. This is a moment of extreme peril. A wingtip strike can cause catastrophic structural damage, sending the aircraft cartwheeling into a fiery wreck. The margin for error has vanished. The pilots, with reflexes honed by thousands of hours of training, make a split-second decision. Landing is no longer an option. They slam the throttles to full power, and the engines roar to life, clawing the wounded aircraft back into the storm-filled sky. This maneuver, a go-around, is itself fraught with risk, especially in such volatile conditions and with a potentially damaged aircraft. But it is their only chance. The A320 climbs away from the ground it so nearly destroyed itself upon, circling around for a second attempt. This time they approach a different runway, one better aligned with the wind. The subsequent landing is successful, a testament to their extraordinary skill. But for everyone on board, and for those who witnessed the event, the memory of that wingtip scraping the earth remains a chilling reminder of how close they came to utter disaster. The skies over Texas in the summer of 1985 held a hidden and deadly phenomenon, one not yet fully understood by the world of aviation. On August 2nd, Delta Airlines Flight 191, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, was on its final approach to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. On board were 163 souls, their journey nearly complete. Ahead of them, a seemingly innocuous rain shower stood between them and the runway. But within this shower lurked a microburst, a powerful, localized column of sinking air that, upon hitting the ground, spreads outwards in all directions at immense speed. As the TriStar entered the rain shaft, it was initially met with a powerful headwind, which the pilots countered by reducing engine power to maintain their glide path. This is the microburst's deceptive trap. Suddenly, the aircraft passed through the core of the downdraft. The headwind vanished, replaced by a massive sinking column of air and then a violent tailwind. The aircraft's airspeed plummeted catastrophically. The pilots fought back, pushing the throttles to their maximum, but it was too late. The aircraft was in an unsurvivable situation, its altitude disappearing with terrifying speed. The ground rushed up to meet them. The majestic L-1011, a marvel of engineering, struck a field over a mile short of the runway. It bounced across a highway, striking a car and killing its driver, before careening into two large water tanks on the airport perimeter, where it disintegrated in a massive fireball. The devastation was almost total. Of the 163 people on board, 136 passengers and crew members perished, along with the driver on the ground. It was a tragedy of immense proportions, a stark illustration of nature's power to overwhelm technology. The crash of Delta 191 was not in vain. It became a watershed moment in aviation safety. The investigation laid bare the lethal danger of microbursts, spurring urgent research and development. This led to the creation of new technologies, such as onboard wind shear detection systems and advanced Doppler weather radar at airports. Training protocols were rewritten, teaching pilots how to recognize and escape these invisible killers of the sky. The 137 lives lost that day became a solemn catalyst for changes that have since saved countless others from a similar fate. On the 2nd of August 2005, Toronto Pearson International Airport found itself in the grip of a violent summer thunderstorm. The weather was deteriorating rapidly, with heavy rain, severe winds, and lightning flashing across the sky. In the midst of this chaos, Air France Flight 358, an Airbus A340 arriving from Paris, was cleared to land. The pilots were experienced, the aircraft modern, but the conditions on the ground were becoming treacherous. The runway was drenched, a slick surface that would severely test the aircraft's braking capabilities. As the A340 touched down, the pilots immediately deployed the thrust reversers and applied the brakes. But something was wrong. The massive aircraft was not slowing down as expected. The runway, saturated with a deep layer of water from the torrential downpour, was causing the tires to hydroplane. The aircraft was effectively water skiing, a 200-ton machine with terrifyingly little friction to stop its momentum. The end of the runway was approaching with alarming speed, and the pilots were powerless to halt their relentless forward motion. With a sickening lurch, the Airbus overran the runway, plunging down a 60-foot embankment and into the Etobicoke Creek ravine below. The impact was brutal. The landing gear collapsed, engines were torn from the wings, and the fuselage fractured. Incredibly, despite the violence of the crash, the main cabin section remained largely intact, but a new danger emerged almost immediately. Fuel, leaking from the ruptured wing tanks, ignited, and a fierce fire began to consume the wreckage, sending thick black smoke billowing into the stormy sky. What happened next is often called the miracle in Toronto. The cabin crew, despite their own injuries and the surrounding chaos, performed with breathtaking courage and professionalism. They swiftly opened emergency exits and directed the 309 passengers and crew to evacuate the burning plane. People slid down emergency chutes into the muddy ravine as flames grew closer. Within 2 minutes, the aircraft was completely evacuated. Everyone, all 309 souls on board, survived. It was a stunning testament to crew training, aircraft design, and perhaps a measure of sheer luck in the face of a fiery catastrophe. In July of 2015, the Pacific Ocean gave birth to a monster typhoon Chan-Hom. A sprawling, violent system with winds of terrifying force, it churned directly towards the island of Okinawa, Japan. As the storm bore down, most air traffic was quite sensibly canceled. Yet one flight, a Boeing 737, found itself tasked with making a landing at Naha Airport in conditions that were rapidly becoming unflyable. The pilots were heading into the jaws of one of nature's most powerful creations, a swirling vortex of wind and rain. The approach was a brutal battle. The aircraft was tossed about by extreme turbulence, a constant violent shaking that tested the airframe to its limits. Inside the cabin, passengers were gripped by fear as the plane dropped and shuddered, the roar of the wind outside a constant, deafening reminder of the typhoon's power. Through the rain-streaked windows, the world was a blur of gray and white. The pilots, wrestling with the controls, fought to keep the aircraft aligned with a runway they could barely see. On their first attempt to land as they descended through the storm's outer bands, a sudden and vicious gust of wind shear slammed into the aircraft, throwing it dangerously off course. The instruments screamed warnings. A safe landing was impossible. The pilots made the correct call, aborting the landing and executing a go-around, climbing back into the turbulent heart of the typhoon. The relief of escaping the ground was short-lived, as they now had to endure another round with the storm, circling for a second attempt. The second approach was no easier. The typhoon seemed reluctant to release its grip, subjecting the aircraft to another onslaught of severe turbulence and unpredictable winds. Again, the conditions were deemed too unstable, too dangerous for a landing. A second go-around was initiated. The tension in the cockpit and the cabin must have been almost unbearable. Finally, on the third attempt, a momentary lull in the storm's fury provided a small window of opportunity. With immense skill and concentration, the pilots guided the battered 737 onto the runway, bringing the terrifying ordeal to a safe conclusion. It was a routine long-haul flight, a journey of nearly 12 hours from Beijing to London. On January 17, 2008, British Airways Flight 38, a Boeing 777, was on its final approach to Heathrow Airport. The weather was cold, but not unusually so. The aircraft, with 152 people on board, was just 2 miles from the runway, and at an altitude of 600 feet. Everything was proceeding normally. The pilots were preparing for a standard, uneventful landing. Then, without warning, the unthinkable happened. The right engine failed to respond to the autothrottle's command for more power. Seconds later, the left engine did the same. Both of the aircraft's massive Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engines had suffered a near-simultaneous rollback, losing almost all thrust. The pilots were suddenly at the controls of a 200-ton glider. The silence in the cockpit must have been deafening, broken only by the rising chorus of alarms. The runway, once so close, was now an impossible distance away. They were falling out of the sky. The cause was insidious and invisible. During the long cruise in the intense cold of high altitude, tiny ice crystals, smaller than grains of salt, had built up in the fuel system. As the aircraft descended into warmer air and demanded more power for landing, these ice crystals melted and released a surge of water that overwhelmed the fuel-oil heat exchanger, causing ice to form and choke the flow of fuel to the engines. It was a 1 in a billion anomaly that no one had predicted. The aircraft was doomed to land short of the runway. Captain Peter Burkill took manual control, his co-pilot John Coward frantically trying to restart the engines. Burkill raised the flaps to reduce drag, trying to stretch their glide as far as possible. He was aiming for the grass, anything to avoid the buildings and roads that lay before the runway. The 777 slammed into the ground 1,000 feet short of the tarmac, its landing gear collapsing on impact. It skidded across the grass, the right wing suffering substantial damage, before coming to a stop at the runway's edge. Miraculously, despite the violent crash landing, there were no fatalities. It was a testament to the pilot's incredible airmanship in the face of a silent, unforeseen enemy. The Asian monsoon is a force of nature on a continental scale, a season defined by torrential rains and powerful, shifting winds. In July of 2021, Manila's Ninoy Aquino International Airport was being lashed by just such a weather system. Arriving from Los Angeles, Philippine Airlines Flight PR-102, a Boeing 777, began its descent into the swirling chaos. The pilots knew the landing would be challenging, but the true violence of the weather was yet to reveal itself. As the aircraft descended through the thick, rain-filled clouds, it was battered by severe turbulence. But the greatest challenge was the wind. A ferocious crosswind, combined with unpredictable wind shear, was howling across the runway. This created a volatile and dangerous environment for a landing. The pilots had to crab the large aircraft at a sharp angle, fighting to keep it aligned with the center line of a runway that was being hammered by sheets of rain, severely reducing visibility. On their first approach, the 777 was buffeted so violently that a stable landing became impossible. The wind shear alarm blared in the cockpit, a stark warning of the danger. The pilots made the difficult but correct decision to abort, applying full power and climbing back into the turbulent skies. For the passengers who had been expecting the relief of touchdown, this sudden, powerful ascent back into the storm was a terrifying development, signaling that the battle was far from over. The crew circled, waiting for a break in the weather that never seemed to come. They initiated a second approach, once again wrestling the giant jet against the monsoon's fury. Again, the conditions were too severe, the winds too unpredictable. A second go-around was necessary, the tension was immense. Fuel was becoming a consideration. Finally, on the third and final attempt, with skill, determination, and perhaps a small degree of cooperation from the weather, the pilots managed to bring the Boeing 777 safely onto the wet tarmac. The audible sigh of relief from passengers and crew echoed the immense stress of an encounter where nature very nearly won. Trabzon, a city on the Black Sea coast of Turkey, is known for its dramatic weather where storms can sweep in from the sea with little warning. On the 13th of January 2018, Pegasus Airlines Flight 8622, a Boeing 737, was making its approach to Trabzon Airport during just such a storm. The night was dark, the rain was heavy, and the air was, well, alive with electricity. As the aircraft descended, it was struck by a bolt of lightning, a common enough occurrence but one that adds immense stress to an already difficult situation. The pilots, contending with the after effects of the lightning strike and the violent thunderstorm, continued their approach. The landing on the wet runway was hard, but the true terror was yet to come. As the aircraft decelerated, something went terribly wrong. A sudden asymmetric thrust from one of the engines caused the aircraft to veer sharply to the left. The pilots fought for control, but the wet runway offered little grip. The Boeing 737 skidded off the side of the runway, out of control. It careened across the grass, heading directly for a steep cliff that dropped down towards the cold waters of the Black Sea. The aircraft plunged over the edge, its nose dipping downwards as it slid through the thick mud of the hillside. It came to a stop in a precarious, almost unbelievable position, its nose mere feet from the sea, its tail pointing up towards the runway, stuck fast in the mud. The image was surreal, a passenger jet dangling helplessly on the side of a cliff. Inside the cabin, there was chaos and panic. Passengers had been thrown from their seats, the smell of fuel filling the air. The evacuation was frantic, with people scrambling to get out of the stricken aircraft, fearing it could slide the rest of the way into the sea or catch fire at any moment. Miraculously, despite the terrifying ordeal, all 168 people on board survived, with only minor injuries. The viral photograph of the plane on the hillside became a global sensation, a stark visual representation of a flight that ended just inches from a watery grave. For decades, Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport was the stuff of aviation legend and pilot nightmares. Its infamous runway 13 approach required aircraft to fly low over the crowded high-rises of Kowloon, make a sharp 47-degree turn at an altitude of just a few hundred feet, and then immediately land. This maneuver, guided by a large red and white checkerboard painted on a hillside, was difficult in perfect weather. During a typhoon, it was an act of supreme courage and skill. Imagine the scene in the 1990s. A Boeing 747, the queen of the skies, is approaching a city being battered by typhoon-force winds and torrential rain. The visibility is near zero. The pilots are flying not just by their instruments but by a deep instinctual knowledge of the aircraft and this uniquely perilous approach. The winds are not just strong, they are erratic, swirling around the dense urban landscape, creating unpredictable turbulence and vicious crosswinds. As the 747 descends towards the city, it is tossed about like a toy. Inside the cockpit, the pilots are engaged in a constant high-stakes battle with the elements. They must spot the checkerboard on the hill, the critical visual marker that signals the beginning of the turn. Missing it, or turning too late, would mean disaster, putting the aircraft on a collision course with the buildings or the hills beyond. The pressure is immense, the margin for error non-existent. With the checkerboard in sight, the pilot banks the huge aircraft into the sharp right turn. The wings seem to skim the rooftops, the wind trying to wrench the plane from its intended path. Passengers look out their windows to see not clouds, but the laundry hanging on the balconies of apartment blocks just feet away. Then, straightening out at the last possible second, the pilot aligns the 747 with the runway and plants it firmly on the tarmac. It is a flawless execution of one of aviation's most difficult challenges, a landing that showcases the pinnacle of piloting skill in the heart of a raging storm. On July 31, 2018, Aeromexico Connect Flight 2431 prepared for takeoff from Durango, Mexico. The sky was dark and ominous, a powerful thunderstorm brewing directly over the airport. Despite the threatening weather, the Embraer 190, with 103 people on board, began its takeoff roll. It was a decision that would have devastating consequences. Just moments after lifting off the ground, at an altitude of only a few hundred feet, the aircraft flew directly into the most violent part of the storm. The aircraft was immediately engulfed by a microburst, a powerful downdraft that slammed it back towards the earth. Simultaneously, it was pelted by a furious barrage of hail. The hailstones, some the size of golf balls, hammered the aircraft's skin, and with a sickening crack, shattered the cockpit windshields, blinding the pilots. The left engine ingested hail and flamed out, followed moments later by the right engine. The plane was now without power, falling, and the pilots could not see. The aircraft struck the ground hard in a field just beyond the runway, its engines and landing gear shearing off on impact. It skidded for over 1,000 feet, breaking apart as it went, before coming to a rest as a fractured wreck. The impact was violent and terrifying, yet the fuselage remained largely in one piece, a testament to modern aircraft construction. But the danger was far from over. Fuel leaking from the ruptured wings ignited, and a fire began to spread rapidly towards the main cabin. What followed was a miracle born of chaos. Despite the crash and the spreading fire, the cabin crew and many passengers acted with incredible speed and bravery. They opened emergency exits and began to evacuate the burning wreckage. People helped one another, carrying children and assisting the injured, escaping the inferno just in time. The aircraft was soon completely consumed by flames, but astonishingly, every single one of the 103 souls on board had made it out alive. It was a story of survival against impossible odds, a crash where everyone walked away. Anchorage, Alaska, is a place where nature's power is always on display. In the winter of 2019, a severe blizzard descended upon the region, bringing with it heavy snow, freezing temperatures, and powerful gusting winds. For Alaska Airlines Flight 138, a Boeing 737 on approach to Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, this blizzard presented a formidable challenge. The pilots were flying into a whiteout, a world where the sky and the ground blend into one disorienting expanse of white. As they descended into the storm, the extreme cold and precipitation began to wreak havoc on the aircraft's sensitive instruments. Ice accumulation on the plane's sensors started to feed the pilots erroneous information about their airspeed and altitude. In aviation, trusting your instruments is paramount. But when the instruments themselves become unreliable, pilots must fall back on their fundamental skills, flying the aircraft by feel and by what little they can glean from the outside world. The greatest challenge, however, was the wind. A brutal crosswind, gusting with ferocious intensity, was sweeping directly across the runway. This forced the pilots to employ a dramatic crabbing technique, flying the aircraft at a significant angle to their direction of travel. To the passengers looking out of the windows, it would have appeared as if they were flying completely sideways, an unsettling and unnatural sight. The turbulence was severe, and the tension in the cabin was palpable with every lurch and shudder of the airframe. The final moments of the approach were a masterclass in airmanship. With the runway lights barely visible through the swirling snow, the pilot had to perform a difficult decrab maneuver at the last possible second, kicking the rudder to straighten the aircraft just as the wheels touched down. The landing was firm, a sideways touchdown that planted the aircraft securely on the icy tarmac. For those inside, the relief was immense. They had just witnessed a tense and skillful battle between pilot and blizzard, a white-knuckle descent that ended safely only because of the crew's extraordinary competence. Each of these terrifying landings reveals a painful truth. Flying through extreme weather is a battle between man and nature, and sometimes our remarkable machines are not enough. We have witnessed pilots confronting the raw, untamed power of the sky, from the invisible fury of a microburst to the grinding ice of a blizzard. They face the unimaginable, forced to make split-second decisions where a fraction of a second, a degree of input, or a moment of hesitation determined the fate of hundreds of lives. Some of these stories end as miracles of survival, a testament to incredible skill, crew coordination, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Others became solemn warnings, tragedies carved into the history of aviation that forced us to learn, adapt, and improve. They remind us that for all our technological prowess, we remain visitors in a domain that we will never fully control. For every passenger on board these flights, one thought must have echoed in their minds as the wheels finally touched down. We were just seconds from disaster. The sky demands our respect, and these stories are a powerful reminder of the skill and dedication of the pilots and crews who navigate its challenges every day. They are the guardians at the gate, the human element that so often makes the difference between a safe arrival and a catastrophe. We thank you for joining us on this journey into the storm. Please subscribe to my channel and share this video with others.